Hello, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Shweta, can we start?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So, welcome again. So this is week three of this clinical management of HIV course from University of Washington. I think most of you might have attended the first two sessions, and this is the week three. And I think some of you might have gone through the University of Washington videos also, which are there on the Canvas, EDGH Canvas website in structure. So this clinical contact session is basically kind of a review, or you can say overview of those two lectures. So basically the topic or the theme of this week is opportunistic infections, non-TB and non-CNS, which also translates to there will be another session will be on opportunistic infections, TB and CNS. So in this 1 hour or 1.5 hours or so, we will try to run through what was the important content of those two lectures. Obviously, the expectation is that all of you should go through those two complete sessions. It's almost like 1 hour session each, and then you can attempt the quizzes and homework assignments. So here we will go through those and we'll try to discuss the important concepts when we talk about opportunistic infections in HIV positives. And we will also talk about the relevant concepts which are important for us while we practice HIV in India. And also we'll see that how things have changed over a period of time. And those concepts which are important for us and also in future we'll be using them. For example, WHO clinical staging, which we use, and in the Western world it is not that often used. But countries like India and also many of the African countries, they still continue to use WHO clinical staging. So we'll go through that as well, and we'll see that those important OIs which we deal with in our day-to-day practice, and we'll see that how things have changed over a period of time. So let's go into the presentation. And towards the end, if you have anything to discuss and express your thoughts, ideas, and experiences, you will be able to do that. So this was the first session, which the recording of which has been uploaded on the Canvas, HIV associated opportunistic infections, by Dr. Harrington. So he starts with this slide saying that OIs were first seen in HIV positives in 1981. At that time, HIV name itself was not there. So a group of gay men comes with an uncommon opportunistic infection at that time, and which was later diagnosed to be a PCP, pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. Later on, the name was changed to pneumocystis caruensis pneumonia. And a similar thing happens around that time in New York City, where 26 gay men came with again cases of Kaposi sarcoma, which was again unusual to see. And initially, people thought that this is something which is happening in gay population, and immunodeficiency is happening. And then they started looking for the virus, and which was found to be HIV. And when we talk about HIV, there was a time when there was no treatment for HIV. There was no ART. Obviously, we are talking about 80s and early 90s. And for India, it was like you can talk about like even first decade of the century also, at least the first 5 years. So we did not have ART into the program. And of course, initially ART was not there anywhere. So the mainstay of treatment was treatment of opportunistic infections. So identifying patients early itself was a big challenge. And if you look at this particular graph, which mentions all these infections in this graph, and also a line which indicates the CD4 level, and the x-axis you can see the duration of the infection. So when HIV comes in, there will be a dip of CD4 count, and then it will recover. So this initial dip happens in the acute phase, acute retroviral syndrome. And then after recovery, CD4 over a period of time declines down. And when the when treatment of OI was mainstay of treatment, then it was really important, and that was a time when patients used to come to the health facility very late in infection with a combination of OIs. There will be multiple OIs at a time, which has not changed much over a period of time. If you see now, also you will see some patients who land up in the testing facilities with full blown AIDS. So the point is that risk of opportunistic infection depends on how much the immunity a person has, HIV positive. Of course, there are some OIs which can happen at any CD4 count, for example, tuberculosis. But the presentation of OIs obviously will not be the same in an immunocompetent person with good immune system, good CD4, and an immunocompromised person with a low CD4 count. If we take again example of pulmonary TB with a good CD4 count or immunocompetent person, even if the person is HIV positive, you will see more of cavitatory disease and pulmonary disease and localized disease, and typical pulmonary tuberculosis is more often. But as and when CD4 goes down, you will see extrapulmonary TB more common, and also you will see pulmonary pleural effusions, mediastinal lymph node enlargements, and disseminated TB meningitis, and all those forms of TB. So even though it is true that some of the OIs happen at all CD4 count, but the presentation of OIs may differ from an immunocompetent to immunosuppressive patients. But there are some of the opportunistic infections which are common if the CD4 goes down below a cutoff, which is usually defined at the level of 200. So we'll later on also discuss why this 200 cutoff is important and how we derive definitions based on that cutoff. So below 200, if you see, there are many viral, fungal, and also bacterial infections which might happen and which will actually cause illnesses, causing all these signs and symptoms of HIV, and we call that as full-blown AIDS. The OIs which are like more concerning to us, or which can be treated again with some specific treatments. We can mention a few there. Pneumocystis carinii pneumonia or Pneumocystis cerevisiae pneumonia. We call it as PCP. The middle C stands for cystis, so that the acronym doesn't change. So then again, Kaposi sarcoma is anyhow not commonly been reported in India. So there is no much data available on that. I have seen a couple of cases at least, and those who have been practicing since long, they also might have seen a few cases. The challenge is again diagnosis and confirmation of diagnosis. Then cryptomeningitis, still you might have seen some cases, but unfortunately or fortunately, you don't see those cases in OPD or ART OPD. So you might have seen, if you have seen patients HIV positive. And toxoplasmosis again, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, MAC or Mycobacterium avium, and cytomegalovirus infection, PML. So all these OIs we'll try to discuss with like some details later on in the presentation. But basically the purpose of this slide is to show that as and when CD4 count declines, you will see occurrence of OIs at different stages of CD4. And there was a time when you work in a resource limited setting and when you don't have access to all the investigations panel and everything, then actually the level of CD4 will also tell you about or help you in ruling out some of the OIs. For example, if I'm seeing a CMV retinitis, or if the CD4 is less than 200 and if the patient is complaining of some vision disturbances, then I can think of CMV retinitis at that time. Or the other way around. There was a time when CD4 itself was not widely available. So based on the OIs, we used to think that CD4 must be below 200 or whatnot. But obviously things have changed all these years. If you see now, there are much more better tests available to see immunosuppression, and also we can see the viral load easily these days. Okay, so HIV associated opportunistic infection, they or any opportunistic infection, they are dictated by three things. One is exposure to organism, then the virulence property of the organism, how virulent the organism is, and also competency of the immune system. By far, what we discussed was regarding the competency of immune system, and The prevalence of OIs in a particular geography depends on obviously prevalence of those infections in that particular geography. By that I mean that now TB, you might have heard many times, that is the most common OI in India in HIV positives. Because on the other hand, also you might know that TB is otherwise also very common infection in India. So more people get the infection, or more people are supposed harboring the infection. Those who are HIV positive, again, from those will get the TB as an opportunistic infection. So similarly, there are other OIs like diarrheal diseases are common in India. The most common in HIV positive is again isospora in South Indian population that have been seen. Then also commonly reported is Cryptosporidium microspora. You might be wondering that you might be doing HIV practice since long time at ART center, but you might not have come across with these cases or diagnosed cases of these. The main problem with again OI diagnosis is diagnostic facilities. So in our settings, we hardly get opportunity to do all these tests to confirm the diagnosis. At the most, people complain to us of diarrhea, we give some antidiarrheals, and if it is not responding, we start ART, and somehow patient gets better. But we never know that what the infection it was and what we treated. So in ideal scenarios, if we have facilities, we'll be able to diagnose OIs. And again, in India also, specifically region-wise, if we see, there are some of the OIs which are common at some of the places. For example, here there is a mention of penicilliosis or tularomycosis, which is common in Northeast, especially in Manipur. It is commonly seen. You can see some cases in West Bengal also. Then again, there is, uh, excuse me. There are some of the again common opportunistic infection like leishmaniasis. If you see, it is so people who practice again West Bengal, Jharkhand, Odisha, and some of that part also, you might have seen cases of leishmaniasis. PCP, we used to see PCP a lot before, but these days we don't see it much. So again, the point is that based on the infections in that particular geography, again, you will see more common OIs happening in that uh, uh, region. Then there are HIV associated and opportunistic infections and malignancies. There is a long list of infections you can see, which you call that as HIV associated, which may range from parasitic, bacterial, fungal, and also in some instances you will see malignancies also common in which is linked with HIV. But again, as I said, the presentation of these OIs will differ from one another. So there are two ways to look at this list. Either you can just enlist all the HIV associated opportunities in infections, or you can have different stages defined to group these opportunistic infections, so that you can stage a patient in which stage of HIV that person is. So that if you see a particular OI, you can say what is the clinical staging or staging of the patient. So there are two types of staging. One is WHO clinical staging, and second is CDC staging. So we don't use CDC staging in India. However, it is very simple. There are three stages there, and it is again dependent on the CD4 count. But in India, we use WHO clinical staging. We'll come to that in a while. So we'll discuss that in a bit more details. So prevention of OI, whether it is possible or not, to some extent, yes. Obviously, the first and foremost thing is what we are doing as of now. Treat all. As soon as you are diagnosing a person as HIV positive, a person can go directly on ART. So which has become very easy even in India here. But at one point, it was not that easy. Even getting CD4, as I mentioned, was a tough task. So everyone was not fortunate to have ART started. So there were cutoffs again. This is for those who are new. Earlier, the ART was started if CD4 goes below 200, then the cutoff was raised to 250, then 350, then 500, and then Treatol came in 2017 in India. So, but again, once a person goes on ART, obviously CD4 and cell-mediated immune response is expected to happen, and person's immune system is expected to become better, which should protect a person from all these opportunistic infections, which might happen if the CD4 goes down. Uh, but if at all ART was not started, and if the person goes in immune suppression stage. So there are some prophylactic medications which we can give to prevent these opportunistic infections. So this is the list, but in this list you can see primary prophylaxis, or what are the criteria to start primary prophylaxis in a particular PLHIV. The first PJP or PCP, which is more appropriate acronym, and toxoplasma, and additional some of the bacterial infections, malaria also included. So all those can be prevented with only trimethoprim and sulfamethoxazole combination, which is nothing but Bactrim or cotrimoxazole. If a person is allergic to that, there are ways to desensitize sulfa, and if again that cannot be done, dapsone can be used as an alternative. TB primary prophylaxis, again these days in the national program also we are using. We'll just come back to that, when should the cotrimoxazole be started and when it should be stopped. But again, before that, in the session of TB, we'll again discuss in details about TB prophylaxis also. But again, just to finish the list, those HIV positive who do not have any of the four TB symptom complex or present, we can give INH chemoprophylaxis as for the duration of 6 months. So 300 milligram of INH is given for the duration of 6 months. There are other combinations also people have proposed, and in many countries have adopted different guidelines. Duration is different, combinations are different. Again, we'll discuss that in a brief later. Mycobacterium avium intracellular complex, again, azithromycin is an option for primary prophylaxis if the CD4 is less than 50. But here you can see when there is no ART. So like I said, and that's why we are talking about this history, that earlier it was not available, and right now it is not that relevant because everyone goes on ART from the point of diagnosis. So if you're depriving someone from ART, then it makes sense that even if the CD4 is less than 50, you can give azithromycin as a prophylaxis. But obviously in our case, at least, especially if the CD4 is less than 50, we push for ART as soon as possible. And also the incidence is not that common in India, so it is not recommended as a primary prophylaxis in adults and adolescents. And coccidiomycosis, histoplasmosis, tyleromycosis, again, primary prophylaxis is not recommended in India. And obviously, if the person goes on ART early, there is no need of all this prophylaxis also. So just to finish this point, at this point, as a primary prophylaxis, we just give sulfamethoxazole, cotrimoxazole, and trimethoprim combination, which is nothing but cotrimoxazole or cotrimoxazole prophylactic therapy, and we call it as CPT. So PCP and toxo will be prevented with that, both. And there is something called as, again, secondary prophylaxis, which we give if the patient has already developed that OI, and if you do not want the patient to get the OI again. So to prevent relapse, we give secondary prophylaxis. There are some diseases where we give it, especially or more commonly, you can say cryptococcal meningitis, for example. You give secondary prophylaxis of fluconazole at least until the time the person's CD4 goes above 250 to be on safer side. So similarly, that can be used for some of the other OIs also, like leishmaniasis and histoplasmosis. But again, the occurrence is not that common in India. Again, same is true with the cotrimoxazole prophylaxis, which we give to a patient who was treated for PCP. If they suppose a patient CD4 is 100 and the patient develops PCP, and uh, you have treated that patient for PCP for 21 days, for example, and then after that you have started now on patients on ART, but still the CD4 is less than 200, so you still continue that 200 milligram of the cotrimoxazole double strength tablet for the duration of 6 months at least. So when ART was introduced, it was just called ART or combination ART. Then initially one drug was given, and then two drug was tried, and then combination ART came in, which was called HART, highly active antiretroviral therapy. These days, again, this term is not being used that commonly, so you just call it as combination therapy or combination ART or ART. So an effect of that is you will get declining incidence of OIs, reduced need for prophylaxis, spontaneous improvements and cures, and immune reconstitution effect. So this is one thing which we'll discuss in a bit more details. Rest of the things are, I think, clear to you that after initiation of ART, CD4 rises up, there will be obviously decline of OIs. And that's why globally there has been a trend of declining OIs and declining mortality and morbidity because of OIs. But unfortunately, because the patients still come to the health facility later in the stage of infections, there has been we still tend to see OIs in our clinical practice. So they have not completely gone away. Um, these are some of the slides which were shown, data from North America, which is not very relevant to us, but it is good to make a point that without ART and with ART, what has happened. So when ART has come in, you can see there is a decline of overall all the OIs you can see going down. And in terms of survival rates also, without ART or pre-therapy era, you can see this Kaplan-Meier curves. Survival was so low once the patient is diagnosed with HIV, but with ART now, whatever OIs you are dealing with, and all OIs, you can see a better survival rates with continued ART, even if the person has Kaposi sarcoma. But once you start ART, the survival is better. There are some OIs which we cannot treat, and those are the OIs for which ART is very helpful. So once you start ART, those OIs or the person gets better even if they have these opportunistic infections. Like pneumocystis, the progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy caused by JC virus in the brain. There is no specific treatment of that. Once you start ART, slowly the patients show improvement. Then again, cryptosporidium parvum, there are some treatments which people recommend, like nitazoxanide and others, but there is no specific treatment as such. You give ART and slowly diarrhea goes away. Microsporidiosis, Kaposi sarcoma, MAC. Again, there are some specific treatments for these, at least couple of these. But the mainstay of treatment, if a person has these OIs, is ART or heart. So let's talk about immune reconstitution syndrome as and first look at this term itself. Immune, related to the immune system. Reconstitution, which means reinvigoration or re-establishment of immune system. Inflammatory, it causes inflammations. And then it's syndrome. So there is it's constellation of symptoms. It's symptoms at one place. So this is an illness occurring in a HIV positive person with a temporal relationship to the ART initiation. What does it mean is that you see clinical deterioration once you start ART in a person, and it will be represented with an opportunistic infection also. So there will be a clinical deterioration happens, but everything you can link it to ART initiation cutoff. So once ART initiation happens, and after that you can see the clinical deterioration. So there are some criteria also need to be fulfilled. First of all, this diagnosis cannot be confirmed by any particular test as such. So this has to be a diagnosis of exclusion. And as I mentioned before, there has to be a temporal relationship. There should be an evidence of establishment of immune system or immunity. So you can do CD4 to see increase CD4, which may not happen so soon, but you can see a rapid decline in viral load also. If you know the baseline viral load and if you repeat viral load after the person gets this particular condition, then you can see a rapid decline in the viral load. Then obviously there will be an inflammatory process. Patients will clinically deteriorate. Patient may get fevers and also inflammation happening around, and deterioration of the clinical condition if the person does not already have at the time of ART initiation, and reappearance or occurrence of new opportunistic infections after initiation of ART, especially in the earlier phase. So this is IRIS, or immune reconstitution inflammatory syndrome, a syndrome which is happening because of reconstituted immunity in HIV positives after initiation of ART. There are two types of iris. We can divide that in two versions. One is paradoxical reaction, which is nothing but deterioration, clinical deterioration. Basically, a person already has OI. Suppose you brought the OI under control with some of the treatments, and then you started ART. But after initiation of ART, there is again deterioration of the condition, and a person starts showing signs and symptoms of the same OI. In fact, clinical worsening. So this is called as a paradoxical reaction. The second type of iris is called as unmasking or infection unmasking type of iris, which is nothing but a person who has been started on ART and was not having any OI to begin with at the time of ART initiation. But once you started ART, after some time, person starts showing signs and symptoms of OIs, which you can confirm through laboratory or through imaging. So this means that person was already having an infection before ART was started, and as soon as you started ART, the immunity was reinvigorated, and that reinvigorated or reconstituted immunity now is responding to that hidden infection which was already there before and which was not diagnosed at the time of ART initiation. So this type of iris is called as infection unmasking type of iris. So there are some risk factors. So through some studies, some people have laid down some risk factors of iris, which are not essentially be there every time, but these again help in supporting your predictions of iris. For example, if at the time of ART initiation, you are dealing with suppose advanced HIV, that means CD4 is less than 200, then high pathogen or antigen burden. So the OIs which you are treating for the patient for are not under full control. For example, if the treatment of PCP is for 21 days and you decided to start ART on after first week of treatment, for example, so obviously there won't be any suppression of or enough suppression of the illness, and before that you started treatment of OI. Another example can be again cryptococcal meningitis. There are recommendations to start ART late if the person has cryptomeningitis, at least delay for a period of a month or so, 6 to 8 weeks. But if you decide to ART early, there is a risk of relapse, and also there is a risk of life-threatening immune reconstitution inflammatory syndrome. Then short interval between OI and treatment initiation and ARV initiation. And also there are other factors like low CD4 count, high RNA, disseminated infection, and sudden drop of viral load and sudden increase of CD4. And there are some host factors also, which are uh, based on like patients' own genetic factors, which make the some people prone for these OIs. And it may also get is may be related to the ART combinations. So some ARTs, they act faster than others, and in which may result in again development of OIs. So obviously there are so many infections in our radar, and any of the infection can present as opportunistic infection. And similar to the logic of OIs, which I explained before, uh, uh, it again depends on geography where you are living. So in India, for example, if you say what is the most common iris in India, obviously the answer will be TB, because that is most common OI. So TB is presented as most common opportunistic infection in India. But again, any of these infections can present as an OI. In fact, there are some malignancies also which can present as immune reconstitution syndromes. So they may get deteriorated because of this immune reconstitution. It need not be infective every time. So this is about again incidence of iris. So I'm not going in details of this, because in terms of relationship with this again vary from geography to geography. I gave you examples of India like TB and PCP and cryptomeningitis and for that matter even PML and diarrheal diseases. So anyone can present as an OI. But again, management of iris differs. So it depends on what type of iris you are dealing with, and again based on the presentation and of the iris, you may decide on your line of treatment. Again, we can see this through an example of cryptomeningitis. If and TB also you can see for that matter. If it is a paradoxical reaction, if the person is already on a treatment of that particular OI, and now you are seeing clinical deterioration, and the patient is already on ART, so in this particular case, you may decide to use steroids. So steroids will help in paradoxical reactions to reduce the inflammation and to give chance to the specific OI treatment to act, and also ART to act. But please remember that at some of these instances, you may decide on withholding ART temporarily when there is a life-threatening risk to a particular patient. So when there is a risk to life, you may decide on not to continue ART, but to temporarily withhold it, and you treat the patient with steroids and other OI-specific treatment and some local treatments, and then you can restart once the patient is clinical condition is better enough. But if you look at the other type of iris, the infection unmasking type of iris, if you give steroids to begin with in those patients, patients may get prone for other infections, and also patients may clinically deteriorate. So there, the mainstay of treatment is treating the OI with that anti-OI treatment itself. If the person is not on PCP treatment, you start the patient on PCP treatment, for example. And similarly, a role of steroids in a specific in some of the OIs like crypto, which all these CNS OIs will discuss in details later. But those relevant points I'm just trying to mention that in cryptomeningitis there may not be any role of steroids, because of again the way the pathophysiology of crypto is. It is basically not because of inflammation, it is because of the other reasons which actually causes the meningitis. So there are again some alternative to steroids also, which in practice we don't use these alternatives. Steroids are good enough. So in conclusion, iris is manageable, and it should not iris should not let you delay ART initiation, because most of the iris cases are manageable, but delay in ART initiation can become life-threatening, which because it exposes the patient to much more opportunistic infections. So, so as a summary, in the first lecture in the by the UW faculty, he tried to summarize through these points that OIs are predictable, and some of the OIs are preventable. Most of the OIs are treatable, and if you start ART early, you may avoid all these OIs. But if the patient suppose already have OIs, There are some OIs where you might decide to delay ART initiation in a bit, and there are some OIs where you want to initiate ART early. So every time we link this to ART initiation, because obviously that is an important landmark in a person's management. So once you start ART, the risk of OIs goes down. So now timing of ART initiation in relation to OIs, it depends on what OI you are dealing with. There are some OIs where you want to start ART early, for example, TB, especially when CD4 is less than 50. Again, exception is TB meningitis. But other forms of TB, you want to start ART as soon as possible, as soon as patient tolerates TB treatment. But there are some other OIs where you want to delay ART initiation. For example, again, standard example can be cryptomeningitis. And all the other OIs will have this intermediate time period. So but the basic concept is you treat the OI first to a point where you achieve good suppression of that infection. And once you are confident that the patient's infection is under good control, then you can start ART initiation. So in most of the OIs where the treatment is short term, usually you complete the treatment and you start ART. But if the treatment duration is long, for example, TB like 6 months, you cannot wait for 6 months for ART initiation. There, as soon as patient tolerates TB treatment, you start ART. So the main purpose of having two lectures for this particular theme was to introduce you to what is happening in the developed nation, where you have all the facilities available to diagnose the infection in the lab and confirm the diagnosis and have liberty to start specific treatments for those diagnoses. But in the second session by Dr. Susan Graham, so she, as she mentioned, she spent a lot of time and so many years working in Kenya and other resource limited settings. So this is, I think, mostly like the scenarios where we work in the NACO program. Obviously, we have good institutions and tertiary institutions where there might be facilities for doing all the good investigations and getting the results in time. But most of us work in situations where we don't have liberty to confirm diagnosis for many of the OIs. Uh, um, so the main idea of the second lecture was to understand importance of consequences of late presentation of ART, which is still happening even in the NACO program. It has changed, it has improved a little bit, but it is unfortunately we still see patients when the CD4 goes below 200 when they report it to the ART center for the first time. So to consider the most common causes of death in OIs in resource limited settings, we'll talk about cotrimoxazole in a little bit more details, and also we'll see a WHO guidelines of cotrimoxazole, and also we'll talk about WHO clinical staging and how that happens. So this slide was already discussed before. I can skip this. So there has been a little change. This data was published in 2018, following 2014 and 15 publications. Little change in CD4 count at presentation. So meta-analysis in 2015 was done for many studies which were done in sub-Saharan Africa. But again, the reality is that the CD4 at presentation and at ART initiation has not increased over time. So we still see very low CD4 counts at the time of patients reporting to the health facilities or at the time of ART initiation. And it is not very different in India. And we call it as advanced HIV. I don't know how many of you have studied advanced HIV disease. WHO defines advanced HIV disease as any patients with CD4 count less than 200 per cubic millimeter, or in WHO clinical stage 3 or 4 OI, having WHO clinical stage 3 or 4 OI, or all children less than 5 years of age if they are HIV positive. All these people will be grouped in advanced HIV disease. And WHO recommends a package for them for management of advanced HIV disease. So we'll not go in details of this, but we'll mention it somewhere. So late presentation is still a major problem in resource limited settings. And there are some factors also associated with it, like poverty, stigma, and again, interestingly, test and treat has been related to it. In this era of test and treat, decreased use of CD4 count testing has increased risk that advanced immune suppression goes undetected. So earlier, the patients used to do CD4 count often, but these days, in India or in the national NACO guidelines, we still have kept a CD4 count as a mandatory test sooner or later. But in some of the countries, as there is test and start or test and treat, they are not looking at the CD4 count itself. So it's difficult to categorize a patient under advanced HIV disease. So late presentation for ART, obviously there will be a lot of consequences if the patient presents late. Patients may have multiple OIs. There are other organs which may be directly affected by HIV, like heart and kidneys and lungs and liver. Then malignancies might happen. The HIV may get transmitted to partners and children. The overall life expectancy might go down, and also CD4 restoration may not be like as good as if you start ART early. Viral suppression may get delayed. All these problems might happen. So again, these are list of infections. I'm not going in details for, but again, suboptimal CD4 recovery can happen. So this is a study which was referred to in this lecture, where more than 50% did not attain CD4 more than 500 even after 5 years if they have presented late. So if a person presents late with advanced HIV disease, CD4 restoration also may happen slow, and many of the patients may not attain good level of CD4 also in later life. Then challenges of OIs and NCD management in resource limited setting, as we discussed, there are diagnostic limitations and there are economical limitations also on the side of patients and also provider, so that we are not able to provide everything to the best of the requirements. Then treatment is difficult because of maybe non-affordability, and also maybe because of some other difficulties like management of overlapping toxicities and interactions and all that. So algorithmic diagnosis and broad empiric treatment are used in resource limited settings, so which again is challenging sometimes. So let's talk about WHO clinical staging, and let's see some of the examples of that. This is in a nutshell WHO clinical staging looks like. Stage 1 is asymptomatic, stage 2 is minor skin infections, minor weight loss, and upper respiratory tract infections. Stage 3 is considerate weight loss, you can say, and you can see the lower respiratory tract infections, and then bacterial and fungal infections, diarrheal diseases, and all that. Then in stage 4, you will see age-defining conditions, malignancies, severe form of bacterial, fungal, parasitic infections, disseminated form of infections, and also including tuberculosis. All that kind of infections are seen in stage 4. So now, when we look at WHO clinical staging itself, its importance has reduced over a period of time. Initially, in those years, uh, when there were no facilities of CD4 for everyone, no facilities for ART for everyone, this staging was a mainstay to decide who will get CD4, who will get ART, and so on. So those who were reported as in WHO clinical stage 3 and 4 used to get CD4 early, because that was the time when we were struggling and prioritizing the patients. These days, its importance has gone down, and more than diagnosis, its importance is in monitoring purposes. So once you start a person on ART, then you want to monitor clinical stage also to ensure that the person is not deteriorating clinically. So, and if you look at again closely this long list of OIs in clinical staging, So there are a group of OIs which can be diagnosed presumptively, and you can make a clinical diagnosis and you can treat those OIs. For example, oral candidiasis. You need not every time take the sample and go to the lab to confirm the diagnosis. You can just confirm and you can say this oral thrush, and you can say WHO clinical stage 3. So it is as simple as that. But again, there are some of the infections where you need lab confirmation to put that infection in a particular stage of OI. For example, again, cryptococcal meningitis. So by looking at the patient, you cannot say, first of all, it is a meningitis. Secondly, you cannot say it for sure that it is cryptococcal meningitis. Obviously, you will have to take sample, you will have to test in the lab, and then you will have to report that as a cryptococcal meningitis. And then only you can say that the person has this disease. And then you will label that patient and in WHO clinical stage 4. Now, another example of clinical stage 4 is PCP again. Now, for PCP, you don't need to confirm the diagnosis in the microbiology lab. Looking at the clinical presentation, looking at the radiological finding, you usually end up labeling someone as having PCP, and you treat the patients accordingly, and patients get better also. And you can label that as a clinical stage 4. So in this case, again, you don't require a lab confirmation to make the diagnosis and to stage the particular person. So keep these two things in mind, in that in this long list, there are OIs which can be reported based on the clinical diagnosis, and there are infections which need lab confirmation to report diagnosis. So clinical stage 1 is essentially asymptomatic, or you can say another thing in that is persistent generalized lymphadenopathy, PGL. Can be another. Essentially, those patients who are having acute retroviral syndrome or asymptomatic or do not have anything, they fall under WHO clinical stage 1. Clinical stage 2, as I said, you can say that moderate or unexplained weight loss less than 10%. Again, word unexplained is important because if it is voluntary weight loss, it won't count. Then presumed or measured body weight. So if you expect a person's weight to be 40 and now it is 35, it is or 38, so it is less than 10% of body weight, you can label that as clinical stage 2. So similarly, minor skin infections like again herpes zoster, will for now we'll consider that as a minor skin infection. Papular pruritic eruptions, which are very again itchy infections. Then even the herpes simplex, so that also will be counted as a minor skin infection. So all that, angular cheilitis, all these will be counted in, again, fungal nail infection, onychomycosis, seborrheic dermatitis or dandruff. All these will be counted as WHO clinical stage 2. There are some differences in adult and children. In children, unexplained persistent hepatosplenomegaly, lineal gingival erythema, that is gingival markings in the mouth. You will see erythematous lining there. So that is called as lineal gingival erythema because of unknown cause. Then extensive wart infection, molluscum contagiosum, unexplained persistent parotid enlargement, all these will count under WHO clinical stage 2. Stage 3, weight loss is more than 10% body weight. Previously, it was less than 10%. And there are some common OIs you can remember. Diarrhea or chronic diarrhea for more than 1 month. And then unexpected, unexplained fever or intermittent for more than 1 month. Persistent oral candidiasis, hairy leukoplakia, pulmonary TB, all these, and lower respiratory tract infections like pneumonia. And also you can add the empyema to it. Then bone and joint infections, all these will fall under WHO clinical stage 3. And there are some differences, like I said, lymph node TB in pediatrics, it is labeled in stage 3, whereas in adult it will go in stage 4 because it's an extrapulmonary TB. Then there are some additions in pediatric list, like symptomatic lymphoid interstitial pneumonitis and some other like bronchiectasis and some other conditions. Then WHO clinical stage 4. There is a long list of infections here. And we can discuss a few, and then the rest you can refer to. Those who are beginners, you need not remember all these things. Just remember the concept and logic, the way I tried to explain. That in stage 1, it was asymptomatic. Stage 2, minor skin infections, upper respiratory infections, some weight loss. Stage 3, more weight loss, lower respiratory infections, and then the major again infections. Stage 4, disseminated infections, and also CNS or extrapulmonary TB, and infections involving brain and central nervous system are like toxo and crypto, and all these things will come in the WHO clinical stage 4. There is a term which is given here, the HIV wasting syndrome, which is nothing but weight loss or of more than 10% body weight, plus either unexplained diarrhea or fever, or either diarrhea or fever for more than 1 month will be called as wasting syndrome. Then malignancies all will come in stage 4, including sarcomas like Kaposi sarcoma, cytomegalovirus infections, and then CNS infections, encephalopathies, disseminated TB, disseminated fungal infections, PML, progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. As name suggests, it is a progressive whitening of the lung, of the brain, and then cryptosporidiosis and isospora or diarrheal diseases, all these will fall under WHO clinical stage 4. Septicemia, mycosis, and again lymphomas. So these are few examples. I'll just quickly go through some of the cases. These are again very commonly seen as vesicular lesions around the mouth, which is sometimes reported reported after a person gets fever or something, but this is nothing but herpes simplex infection, WHO clinical stage 2. This is herpes zoster involving a single dermatome. It is, if it involves more than that, again it may involve multiple dermatomes where it will go in stage 3 also. Here it is oral thrush in the mouth, like curd-like appearance. And also here you can, in the second picture, you can see soft palate involvement. And also the person may complain of odynophagia or pain in deglutition. So where you can confirm that it is oral as well as esophageal candidiasis. So why this demarcation is important, because if it is oral candidiasis, persistent oral candidiasis is WHO clinical stage 3. But if it is esophageal candidiasis, it is WHO clinical stage 4. This is another OI caused by Epstein-Barr virus on the lateral margin of the tongue, vertical corrugated markings, which is called as oral hairy leukoplakia. There is no specific treatment for this. You just start ART and person becomes better. Then there are other, you can see a cavity here, and most common reason of cavity formation in Indian population having infections is because of tuberculosis. If it is a pulmonary tuberculosis, it is WHO clinical stage 3. And obviously, if it is extrapulmonary, it is stage 4. And these are bacterial pneumonias, repeated bacterial pneumonias in adults will be in WHO clinical stage 3. You consider that as a lower respiratory tract infection. And if it is in adult a patient, lymph node or matted lymphadenopathy, cervical lymphadenopathy, it is crofilloderma, or it is basically this is extrapulmonary TB, clinical stage 4. Similarly, lesions in the brain, this may be tuberculoma or lymphoma, or can be toxoplasma. So this also will be in the WHO clinical stage 4. Diarrheal diseases like this, Cryptosporidium parvum, will be clinical stage 4, and then wasting syndrome will be in stage 4. And this is an example of PCP. So PCP is something which is really interesting OIs, which I'll talk about like briefly here, and then we can move ahead. You can listen to like more about PCP in the lecture as well. So this is something very interesting OI, which we used to see a lot these days. I don't know how many PCPs at ART centers you see and report, But there was a time when we used to see PCP a lot, and we used to see complicated cases. So a person may present with dry cough and breathlessness, especially on exertion, and X-ray may be normal. So very similar to like COVID these days, what you see, except that fever will not be high grade. So because PCP is also an interstitial disease, so it infects the type 1 pneumocytes, and it may progress to moderate and severe form of PCP, where you will see similar to like COVID these days. You are seeing ground glass opacities on the X-rays and high resolution CT scanning. So treatment of PCP is very simple. Like I said, it is an interstitial disease, but those who want to confirm the organism, they can do bronchoalveolar lavage in specialized settings through bronchoscopies. You can collect the sample and test. You can see initially the pneumocystis. There was a long fight to report whether it is a bacteria or fungus or what. But later on, it was reported as atypical fungus. This is atypical fungus, Pneumocystis carinii, and treatment is really simple. High dose of cotrimoxazole is given for treatment, and most of the patients, they respond better or good to this treatment. Some patients, they require oxygen in the later moderate to severe stages. And there are some patients who require, and a picture becomes again complicated when the patients, because we used to see patients with co-infections of PCP and TB. So again, it becomes really difficult to then diagnose and treat those two OIs together. So obviously you can understand the pill burden, and also pressure of ART initiation, and also pressure of iris. So all those things were really complicated at that time, but all these things have become simple now, again, thanks to ART or early ART initiation. So unfortunately, very less patients these days are being reported. I honestly don't know if actually the number of OI has gone down or the number of reporting has gone down, because unfortunately, these patients, they do not come directly to the ART center. They go to the hospitals, they get treated, they come back to you for ART, and many at the cases, ART medical officers will not have any clue that the person was treated for the OI as such. But those who are on ART, and those whom we are monitoring for viral load and response to ART, at least in them we can see if they develop such signs and symptoms. Because failure to ART will again re-invite all the infections back as an opportunistic infections. Because failure to ART will put the patients again back to the stage of immune suppression, and the patients may get OIs again. This is again, you can see bilateral involvement. You can see some of the millet-like or nodular lesions also. It is not very typical of a miliary TB, but this is the patient from Manipur, Imphal. But again, these are tubercular or nodular lesions where the DD can be again histoplasmosis, or also for that matter, telomere process and all that. Because if you have seen miliary TB, it is very again smaller lesion than nodules. Um, Again, if I ask you a question, and that if you come across a miliary TB, so will it be defined as a pulmonary TB or extrapulmonary TB? Because you will see that in on the X-rays, and because again, it will decide if the patient is in WHO clinical stage 3 or stage 4. If I can expect answers from the someone who's listening to the presentation, if anyone wants to answer in the chat box. The question is that if someone is having miliary TB, which you see on the X-rays, will you label that as a WHO clinical staging 3, saying that it is a pulmonary TB, or clinical stage 4 as an extrapulmonary TB? Okay, so I'm getting answers as pulmonary TB. So yeah, so in a way you are looking that as an X-ray showing TB. That is why you are seeing that as a pulmonary TB. But actually, the way miliary TB presents, As I said, miliary TB is also a form of interstitial TB, which happens because of hematogenous dissemination of TB, and which happens mostly because of disseminated form of TB, where there is a secondary distribution or secondary circulation of bacillus into the main stream circulation or main circulation, where the tubercular bacillus is circulating into the blood, and then when this oxygenated blood goes back to the lungs through the pulmonary circulation, then, or I would say the bronchial circulation, then this type of TB is seen. So actually, it is not pulmonary. So basically, it is an extrapulmonary form of TB, and that is why it has to be. It should be reported as WHO clinical stage 4. You saying it as a stage 3 is fine, but if you go into the depth of pathophysiology, why this happens, how it happens. So if you are looking at a miliary TB, it means that patient has hematogenous dissemination. So if this patient dies, and if you take out the liver and see, on the liver also you might see this millet-like tubercles. So it is not just in the lung, it is everywhere in the body. That's what it indicates. That is why it is a serious form of TB. It is an extrapulmonary form of TB. And that's why you should label that as a WHO clinical stage 4. So this is a bit divergent. It is not related to this slide. Okay, so this is a child again. As I told you, in pediatric patients, if you look at the cervical lymph nodes, these lymph nodes will be reported as and also if it is because of TB again, it will not be reported as a WHO clinical stage 4, unlike in adults. In children, cervical lymph node is reported as cervical TB lymph node is reported as WHO clinical stage 3. This is an exception. Also, unilateral pleural effusion, for that matter, unilateral pleural effusion usually will be reported as WHO clinical stage 4. But in pediatric cases, it will be reported as WHO clinical stage 3. Unilateral mild pleural effusion in pediatric. This was also an exception which I showed you. It is not there in adult WHO clinical staging list. Hepatosplenomegaly, it is WHO clinical stage 2 in pediatric cases. And again, unexplained hepatosplenomegaly, that's what we are talking about. And this is nothing but molluscum contagiosum. You can see in pediatric more often. It can be seen in like grown-ups also, but more commonly. And sometimes you might see giant molluscum. And again, fortunately or unfortunately, most of our current medical officers who have not seen or witnessed and treated OIs in the wards might have not seen many of these OIs. But knowledge of these OIs is important, not only because it was there in the pre-therapeutic era, because any of these OIs can come back in the failing patients. And that is why it becomes really important for us to know all these OIs. Obviously, with the patients presenting late, you can still see them in the ART OPD also. This is another child where you can see a large parotid enlargement, WHO clinical stage 2. Also, it is unexplained enlargement. Once you start ART, these things will usually go down, like become better of their own. Okay, then coming back to the presentation by the UW faculty again, approaches to OI prevention and management. As I said before, ART is again mainstay of OI prevention. You start ART early, you will avoid all the serious OIs. Vaccinate if you can, hepatitis B at least we can give in India. The 3 doses of hepatitis B vaccines can be given. HPV again, it's recommended in specific group of populations. It is not there under national program. National program do not stop someone from giving HPV vaccination. If someone wants to take, they can take. Then also for pneumonia, a vaccine can be given. It is again not provided under the national program, but if someone has because again pneumonia is something that is community acquired pneumonia is preventable through vaccines. So these things become more relevant if in the patients who are not on ART. But as we are under national program giving ART so early these days, the other prophylaxis may not be required for these patients. Similarly, primary prophylaxis like cotrimoxazole prophylaxis offered to all HIV infected patients to prevent OIs, but there are cutoffs. We start cotrimoxazole prophylaxis if the CD4 is less than 350, or the patient has any WHO stage 4 OI, or having pulmonary tuberculosis, or a person, a child who is exposed to HIV through mother until unless the HIV is ruled out. And those HIV positive children, at least until they reach to the stage of 5 years, they receive cotrimoxazole prophylaxis. So these are the list of people who are given cotrimoxazole prophylaxis in the National Program of India. Secondary prophylaxis, I already told you, there are some diseases where we still give secondary prophylaxis, and then we need to treat OI as they are diagnosed. Cotrimoxazole is again cheap drug available almost everywhere. These days, again, availability slowly it is becoming a problem because you might remember that initial days of our practice, even we used to give Bactrim for sore throat and all that, but these days I hardly see private practitioners or even practitioners utilizing Bactrim. Maybe some government hospitals might be giving them, but otherwise in private practice it has long gone away. It is very effective drug still, and it is should be used, but availability itself will become increasingly a challenge. Not only for the general public, but also in the HIV program itself, it might become a challenge if you don't get manufacturers. So pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, again treatment, it can prevent simple dose of 1 double strength of Bactrim can prevent all these serious opportunistic infections. I told you when it has to be started. When it should be stopped, obviously, when a child is more than 5 years, you can stop. If HIV is ruled out, you can stop. If the person's CD4 is above 350 for at least on two consecutive occasions, you can stop. There is no TB, you can stop. So all these places you can stop. One very interesting fact about again cotrimoxazole, which was discussed in this particular lecture, was that putting patients on uh, cotrimoxazole prophylaxis have prevented infections in the family members. This was, to me, it was again really a fascinating fact because obviously HIV negative family members will be exposed to infections if the HIV positive person is not taking ART or not on prophylaxis, because that person will acquire infection and may transmit those infections to family or household. So this was again really interesting study which was published in Lancet 2017 and which was discussed in the second lecture. So we just discussed about when to stop. But there are some problems with cotrimoxazole. The most common known problem is because it has sulfur drug in it, it may have allergies, and some patients may develop Stevens-Johnson's, that is severe form of allergic reactions might happen. So it need to be carefully monitored, especially in the beginning of a week or two at least. If the person has rash, you can give antihistaminics, that is fine. But anyone who has mucosal involvement should be taken care of very seriously, and there should not be any next dose of cotrimoxazole because then it may lead to Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Mucosal involvement means having oral ulcers, anal ulcers, vaginal ulcers, and things like that. There is a way of desensitizing someone of cotrimoxazole, but it has to happen under supervision. You cannot do that on outpatient basis. You will have to closely monitor these patients every day, and patients should be that cooperative. And there you can try desensitization. Lastly, I think this is the last part of this thing, that reality trial, which is published in NEJM, New England Journal of Medicine, 2017. Which was an open label randomized control trial, 4 African countries, children over 5 and adults who were initiated on ART with CD4 less than 100. What they did was they didn't even just give cotrimoxazole, but they also added the additional prophylaxis like 12 weeks of INH and paradoxin, 12 weeks, which is 3 months of fluconazole, 5 days of azithromycin, 1 dose of albendazole. And they saw that close to 2,000 patients participated in this, were followed for 48 weeks, and median CD4 was 37, 47% were symptomatic. They saw low rates of TB, crypto infection, oral or esophageal candidiasis, deaths, and hospitalizations. Uh, the purpose of me discussing this here is again not to encourage you to give all this list of medicines to all our patients, because in our guidelines these recommendations are not there. But increasingly NACO is also talking about advanced disease management packages, and slowly that also come in program, which essentially says, and some of the components we are already implementing. For example, here in this trial they have used INH for 3 months. We are saying 6 months of INH for those patients who are having no symptoms of TB. But obviously specifically for those patients who are having CD4 less than 200, that is those who are having advanced HIV disease. So WHO recommended package of advanced HIV disease management says that you should start ART as soon as possible, start treatment with prophylactic medications like cotrimoxazole, prevent and screen for TB, and give TB prophylaxis like INH, do four symptom screening regularly. Then there are two additional tests which they again ask for: LAM, urine LAM, and also CRAG, the serum CRAG. Now, urine LAM, there is again we don't have either LAM or CRAG in the program as of now. Which might come in future, we don't know. But right now we need to very carefully rule out TB in all these patients having advanced HIV disease. And also we need to very carefully rule out if they have any symptom or sign suggestive of cryptococcal meningitis. So what we are supposed to do here in while practicing in our ART centers is all those patients who are having CD4 less than 200 and in WHO clinical stage 3 or 4, and in all those children with or less than 5 years of age, all these people need to be very closely monitored and should be ensured that ART initiation happens early in these patients. They are given appropriate prophylaxis with cotrimoxazole and INH. They are regularly be screened for cryptomeningitis and also TB, tuberculosis. And also there is a very close and constant follow-up of all these patients. So if we do all these things, we might not need all sophisticated investigations and tests in our program also. So with the current equipments, whatever we have, we can diagnose and treat these OIs, and we can reduce mortality and morbidity, because this is the group in which who is having advanced HIV disease, where we have highest mortality and morbidity. So this is another publication which was spoken about in the lecture, in the second lecture at the UW, which was published in PLOS Medicine in 2020, where someone from University of Washington, Seattle, had recommended these flowcharts or algorithms when the patient comes, when CD4 is unavailable or available, and when CD4, LAM, and CRAG, everything is available, how the patient needs to be followed up. Everything starts from intensified case finding, that is ruling of TB, doing 4 symptom screening. So you can translate everything to our clinical practice, whatever we do as of now, into the national program. Only thing is that you need to segregate those who are having advanced HIV with those who are having CD4 less than 200, even if they are on ART. Even if they are on ART, if they have CD4 less than 200, if they are less than 5 years of age of children, and if they are having the WHO clinical stage 3 and 4 conditions. So these are the patients whom we need to focus. So as a summary, they talked about again cotrimoxazole prophylaxis and OI management in the resource limited settings. So I thought of including these slides and some of the slides from the national program, and I tried to discuss few important glimpses of the common opportunistic infections, which we used to see earlier. These days, we neither have time and opportunity to diagnose and treat these OIs, and also fortunately, OIs also might be going down because of early ART initiation. That is also a possibility, but we don't have any data to support that claim. So till until the time we say that we don't have OIs, let's make aggressive efforts in diagnosing OIs early in HIV positives, especially if they have advanced HIV disease. Let's try to manage all those OIs or treat them with whatever we have through our national program and also through the local facilities you have, and whatever support possible way we can support these patients. And again, the best thing is to start ART as early as possible in these patients, which will prevent again, definitely there will be reduced occurrence of OIs in these patients. So I hope this discussion will help you in some way. I don't know how much it will help you in solve the quizzes in the university, for which you will have to again refer to the presentations by the UW faculty. This is what I thought, that I'll just add this angle also to the already presented angle in the lectures. If there are any questions or if you want to discuss anything, I think we can discuss it now, or if you want to pose your questions in groups, that also is fine. But again, please uh, do submit your quiz as soon as possible so that you don't lose those marks, and do your homework assignments on time. So all the best for the rest of the course. I'll stop here. So that's it from my side. If there is any questions or comments, I'll be happy to address and answer. Thank you. There is one, I think it is a question. What was case 19 in child? Case 19 in child means from the presentation you are saying. Let's see if there is. Okay. This one we already, I think, discussed. Case 19 was molluscum contagiosum, and this is again something caused by Epstein-Barr virus. And the treatment of this is, though it is for ART, but there can be some cosmetic treatment also. If someone is not responding to it, it can be reduced or removed cosmetically. And especially giant molluscum, they should be definitely removed. Molluscum is again can be confused with cutaneous cryptococcosis also. Sometimes cryptococcal meningitis also present similar. It is something elevated nodules with central umbilication. Once you have, and usually it happens on the upper extremities. Once you see it, I don't think you can forget it. Sometimes whole face will be full with these kinds of lesions, but you can see the magic of ART here. Once you start ART, they'll disappear like they were never there. It's very interesting. These days, I don't know how many of you might have seen, but at one point we used to see many of the cases of honesty. I'm just randomly reading out question. Is serum CRAG enough in advanced HIV? I mean, CSF CRAG must be required. Yes, Dr. Divya, serum CRAG is done for as a screening test, basically. If someone is having headache, for example, if you are doing serum CRAG and if that is negative, most likely, or it is very less likely that patients will have cryptomeningitis. But if serum CRAG is positive, then it is must that you should do CSF CRAG to confirm the diagnosis and to start the treatment. But unfortunately, what happens is in the peripheral institutions, you don't get people to do lumbar puncture and give you CSF for testing. And in those places, if there is CSF CRAG positivity and if the person shows signs and symptoms of meningitis, you as a clinician would like to treat that patient for cryptomeningitis for that matter. So it depends again in situations where you are and how you are practicing and what is available to you and not available to you. Based on that, you may take a decision. Molluscum contagiosum caused by pox virus. Uh, is it? I'm not very sure. You can please confirm. If someone can Google it and confirm for me or for us. It may be caused by pox virus, but yeah. I'm not very sure. I'm just forgetting things, I think. Can someone Google and confirm? Molluscum contagiosum. Thank you, Dr. Sudha. Or shall I Google and confirm? Okay, thank you so much. Someone, yeah, so it is caused by pox virus, not by Epstein-Barr. Thank you for making that comment. Okay, then if there are no, it is pox. So Dr. Amit, can you tell me in humans, molluscum contagiosum? It is not, it's again theoretical question, but it's better to be right. I don't know. Maybe that is homework for all of us. We can just see. Yeah, mic is now open, Amit, if you want to make this comment and any other general comment also is fine. Please go ahead. I guess there is some issue. So that's okay, Miss. It's not that important, but yeah, point well taken. If it is caused by some other virus, that's fine. So I guess this was a good discussion, and all the best to all of you for this week's quizzes and also this week's the sessions. So hope to see you in the next week. So until then, thank you very much. Stay safe and thank you.
Thank you, sir.